Support for this episode is provided by Waterlox. Waterlox lets wood be beautiful. And Kreg. Build it faster and stronger with Kreg Joinery. Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a long format project full of details. So if you like these type of step-by-step videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, and I'll make more. This is a cherry entrance table or sofa table. It features continuous grain in the drawer fronts, Bubinga drawer pulls, drawer stops so the drawers don't fall out of the table and onto the floor, a little bead molding detail at the bottom of the apron, tapered legs, and a curved top. There are professional plans available for this project on my website. Let's get out in the shop and get to work. Today I'm going to start building what I'm calling a classic cherry entrance table. It will have 2 drawers, and like all woodworking projects, this one started in the lumber yard by picking the lumber. For the legs, I'm using 8/4 cherry. 8/4 cherry generally measures around 1 7/8 inches thick. For the apron, I've got one board. I should be able to get all 4 sides of the apron out of this one board. And for the top, I've got this board here, and I should be able to cut it in half, join it back together, and that will give me the top. Let's get started by rough cutting the legs to size. I'll start by cutting the board a little heavy at 30 1/4 inches. Next, I'll use the joiner and put a straight edge on one side of the board. After ripping the 4th leg, I'll flip each leg 1/4 of a turn, make another rip, and square the legs up to 1 3/4 inches. With the legs rough cut to size, the next step is to get started on the apron. After running the boards over the jointer, I'll rip the boards for the back and side aprons at 5 1/4. I'm using this board for the front of the table, and because I want the grain to be continuous through the drawer fronts, it takes a little extra thinking. So what I like to do is first cross-cut this board exactly 1/2 inch heavier than its final measurement. I've squared up the left side of the board, and now I'll make the cross-cut at 35 inches. Now I'll make the first rip at 1 inch, the second rip at 3 inches for the drawers, and the third rip at 1 1/4 inches. And when the boards are joined back together, that will give me the 5 1/4 measurement of the apron. Next, I'll hold the 3 boards together, making sure they're flush at the end. Find the center, which in this case is 17.5. Make a mark and then measure out 1 inch on either side and make another mark. With the boards flush at the ends, I'll use a square and draw a line on the center board. Next, at each end, I'll measure in 2 1/8, making sure I'm flush, and again square across. It's a good idea to put a mark to know that that is the side that you're keeping and this is your cut side. Now I'll remove the center board and cut the parts out using the miter saw. The next step is to use size 0 biscuits to join the parts back together. I'll keep the middle piece centered and I'll set the end pieces in 1/8 of an inch on each side. Now I'm ready to cut the legs to size and get to work on the taper. First, I'll square up one end of each leg, and then I'll set up a stop block at 29 1/4. Now that I have all of the legs cut to size, the next step is to cut the taper, and to do that you'll need a tapering jig. If you'd like to make this one, I'll have a link to the video in the description below. This is a good time to look at your material and decide if there's something you'd like to remove. I've got a knot here, and by hanging this section of the board off of the edge of the jig, I'll be able to cut that away. With the first taper cut, I'll loosen the clamps and then rotate the leg with the cut side facing up. Replace the clamps and cut the second taper. gave the face frame a good sanding, and when I built the face frame, I cut the stiles 1/8 of an inch heavy. So I'll measure over from the inside and make a mark at 2 inches on both sides, and that will be my cut line. After trimming 1/4 of an inch off each side of the face frame, which is the front apron, I then cross-cut the back apron to size at 34.5 inches. Next, I set up a stop block and cut the side aprons at 9.5. I'll use the router to create a bead molding detail at the bottom of the apron. Clamping the boards together creates a wider surface and adds more stability while using the router. After adding the bead to the bottom of the apron, I gave all the parts a good sanding, and the next step is to drill the holes for the pocket hole screws. I'm drilling the holes on the inside of the apron. So this is the front, this is the part that will be seen, this is the inside. I'm measuring down 5/8 of an inch from the top, and I'm measuring up 3/4 of an inch from the bottom. And I'll keep this alignment on the front apron and the back apron. Okay, now this part is the front of the table apron. It has the opening for the drawers. Now I'm going to drill pocket holes in the back of the table apron in those same locations. Again, this is the inside of the table apron, the side that you're not going to see. And just like the front of the table apron, I've measured up from the bottom and made a mark at 3/4 of an inch. And I've measured down from the top and made a mark at 5/8 of an inch. The next step is to drill the pocket holes in the table apron sides, and here I've measured in 1.5 inches on both sides. When I attach the apron to the leg, I need to make sure that I'm attaching the apron to the square side of the leg, and I'm also setting the apron in 1/2 inch. So I've cut a piece of scrap wood here at 1/2 inch, and I'll trace a line, and I'll also use this piece of scrap wood as a guide while I'm clamping the apron to the leg. To assemble the table, I'm attaching the legs to the front and back apron first. Next, I'll attach both sides to the legs with the back apron attached. Once both sides are attached, I can place the assembly on the front, clamp it in place, and attach it with pocket hole screws. I should add that I'm using 1.25 inch pocket hole screws, and the threads are fine. Fine threaded screws are better for hardwoods like cherry. The next step is to make the drawer runners. I'm making these out of poplar, and I'll get started by cutting all the parts to size. Before I put the drawer runners together by adding the bottom and the top, I'll need to drill the pocket holes so I can attach the runners to the front and back of the table with pocket hole screws. I'll drill the pocket holes 3/4 of an inch in on each side. To build the drawer runners, I'll tack the parts in place with a few pin nails, and then pre-drill and countersink holes for 1.5" screws. Before attaching the drawer runners, I'll use the biscuit joiner to create slots. These will come into play later when I attach the top. I'll attach the drawer runners flush with the drawer openings on the sides, top, and bottom. A shorter bit driver would have been helpful here, but I was able to make this one work. With the drawer runners installed, the next step is to make the drawers. The drawer fronts were cut to size earlier in the project when I made the face frame, so I'll get started by making the drawer sides. I'm using sapele wood for the drawer sides, and these are highly figured boards, cutoffs that have been hanging around the shop for a while, so it's nice to put them to a good use. For the back of the drawer, I'm using poplar. After ripping the drawer sides to width, I'll resaw them at 5/8 of an inch. I think a thinner drawer side looks more elegant than the full 3/4 of an inch, which can look a little heavy. After resawing the sides, I'll run them through the drum sander to remove the blade marks. Next, I'll set up a stop block on the miter saw and cut the parts to size. I'm using a rabbet joint at the front of the drawer, and I've set up a stop block and cut the rabbet joint in a piece of scrap wood and tested the fit with the drawer sides. Now that I know I've got a good fit, I'll cut the rabbet joint in the drawer fronts, making sure the front of the drawer is facing up. For the back of the drawer, I'm using a dado joint. I've lowered the blade, set up a stop block, and I'll make one pass on the scrap wood and all 4 of the drawer sides. Now I can hold the board that I'm using for the drawer back at that saw kerf and trace a line. Now that I've got a good fit on the test piece, I can finish the dado on the drawer sides. Now I'm ready to cut the groove for the drawer bottom. I've set the height of the blade at 1/4 inch, adjusted the fence to 2.5 inches, and I'll make one pass on a piece of scrap wood, the drawer fronts, and the drawer sides. Now I'll bring the fence in a little bit, make another pass on the piece of scrap wood, and test the fit. This is the birch plywood I'm using for the drawer bottom, and that looks pretty good. With the groove cut in both fronts and the sides, I've raised the blade, kept the fence right where it is, and I'll rip the back to width. To get the length of the drawer back, I'll measure the inside of the drawer front and add 1/2 inch. That will account for the 1/4 inch dado in each side. In this case, the correct length for the drawer back is 13 3/8. Here's the drawer dry fit together, and I'm at 14 1/8 in the front and 14 1/8 in the back. Next, I'll measure down from the top of the drawer and make a mark at 3/4 and 1 7/8. And I'll do this on all 4 drawer sides. I'm using a 1/4 inch bit in the drill press to countersink holes about 3/16 of an inch deep. Then I'll drill through the sides with a 3 30-second drill bit, making sure to drill in the center of the hole. Next, I'll cut the 1/4 inch birch plywood bottom to size. I'll use a 3/32 drill bit to pre-drill holes for the screws. To assemble the drawer, I'm using Type on 3 wood glue and 1 5/8" finish screws. After screwing the drawer together, I'll remove the clamps and clean up the glue squeeze out with a wet rag. I'll apply a little wood glue to the groove in the drawer front and then slide the drawer bottom in place. I'm tacking the drawer bottom to the drawer back with 18 gauge 1-inch nails in the nail gun. For a little extra strength, I like to add a bead of hot glue to the bottom of the drawer. Applying it at the bottom to the drawer sides and only about 1.5 inches in at the drawer front. I don't apply the glue bead to the entire length of the drawer front because I don't want the glue bead to interfere with the drawer stop that's attached to the back of the face frame. I'll also add a bead of hot glue to the back of the drawer. To fill the screw holes, I'm using a 1/4-inch walnut dowel. I'll cut them to size a little heavy on the bandsaw and then tap them in place with a little CA glue. And then I'll trim them flush with a straight bit in the router. With the drawers finished, the next step is to make the top. I'm making the top out of one solid cherry board, and I'll get started by cutting the board in half. Next, I'll use the joiner to put a straight edge on one side, and then the table saw to rip the boards to width. I'm ripping the boards a little heavy, so I won't need to use glue blocks when I glue the boards together. This way, if I damage the edge of the board with the clamp, I'll be able to clean up the edge when I cut the top to size. I'm using the biscuit joiner to join the boards together, placing the first biscuit about 6 inches from the edge and then about 10 inches apart. Notice that I keep the depth of the biscuit at least 3/8 of an inch from the top. This helps to eliminate telegraphing. Telegraphing is when a noticeable impression in the shape of a biscuit appears in the wood's surface over time. After gluing the boards together, I'll remove most of the glue squeeze out with a chisel and then clean up the rest with a wet rag. I've let the glue set up overnight. Now I can unclamp the top and run it through the drum sander. giving it a few light passes on each side with 100 grit sandpaper. After placing the top on the table, I decided a slight curve in the front would add to the design. Before cutting the curve in the front, I need to cross-cut the top to length, and I've decided to add a 5-degree angle as an added design element. The little painter's tape will help to avoid tear out or chipping during the cut. I'll be using a flush cut bit in the router along with a pattern to make the curve. I posted a video last week on how to make the pattern, and I'll have a link to that video in the description below. Now I've got the MDF pattern on the cherry top. I've got 3.5 inches from the straight edge of the back to the back of the top, and 3.5 inches over here. And now I can trace the pattern and make this rough cut on the bandsaw. Now I have the cherry top clamped onto the pattern. The back of the pattern is at the 3.5 inch mark, and the pattern is 1/2 inch beyond the edge, and it's the same on both sides. Now I can make the finished cut with the router. I want to get that 5-degree angle or bevel that I have on the ends also on the front. So to do that, I'm going to flip the top upside down and measure in just a little bit more than maybe 1/8 inch and draw a straight line. And then I'm going to measure down from the top about 1/16 inch and do the same thing and use the hand plane to shape the front to those lines. For the drawer pulls, I'm using Bubinga. I've got a piece here that measures 3/4 inch by 1 inch. I've set the fence at 1/2 inch and changed the angle of the blade to 7 degrees. I've had the micro jig gripper for about a year, and this is the first time I've used it. I think it works great for small pieces like this and does a great job of keeping the material tight against the fence with your hand at a safe distance from the blade. I moved the fence in a little bit, almost 1/8 inch, and I've lowered the blade to create a small lip at the bottom of the drawer pull. After finding the location for the holes to attach the drawer pulls, I use an awl to create a guide for the drill bit. The small block of wood will help keep the drill bit straight while drilling the hole. Holding the drawer pull in position, I'll drill from the inside of the drawer to mark the drawer pull with the drill bit. Then I'll finish drilling the holes at the drill press. Next, I'll use a screw to make the threads in the drawer pulls. After countersinking the holes from the inside, I use a 3/16 inch drill bit to make the holes a little wider. This will allow for a slight adjustment of the drawer pulls. By shortening the screws a little, I'm less likely to break the drawer pulls. The next step is to make and attach the drawer stops to the back of the face frame. Using a little wood glue and the 23 gauge pin nailer, I'll tack the stops in place and then use squeeze clamps until the glue sets up. To prevent the drawer from being pulled out of the table, I'm adding another stop that can be rotated in and out of position when the drawer is installed. To make the clips to attach the top to the table, I'm starting with a piece of wood that measures 4 by 4 inches, and I want to make sure that the grain is going in this direction for the clips. The first step was to raise the blade to about 1/4 inch, set the fence at 1/8 inch, and make this saw curve. The next step is to move the fence over to about 3/16 inch, raise the blade, and cut this part away. Next, I'll rip the clips at 1 inch and then use the miter saw to cross cut them at 1.25 inches. Over at the drill press, I'll drill and countersink holes so I can attach the top with 1 inch screws. After shaping them on the bandsaw, I'll use the belt sander to remove the blade marks. For the finish, I'm using Waterlox, and I try to apply 2 coats a day about 12 hours apart. After the 3rd coat dries, I'll sand the finish with 320 sandpaper and then apply 2 more coats. I'll allow the last coat to cure for about 3 days before hand rubbing the finish with 4-0 steel wool and Wooloo buffing paste from Mohawk Finishing Products.